So good afternoon and welcome to today's verbal session on water quality. My name is Sarah Lebu. I am a postdoctoral research associate here at UNC. I'll be your moderator here today. And just to give you a quick run of show, we do have 4 presenters lined up. Each of those presenters will be given a total of 15 minutes, and that includes 10 to 12 minutes of presentation, followed by 3 to 5 minutes of Q&A. So I'll be introducing each speaker and then taking questions right after. So without further ado, I'll introduce our first presenter, Mussie Asmare. And Mussie is from the Millennium Water Alliance. Welcome, Mussie.
Thank you. I'm Mussie Tezazu, working for the Millennium Water Alliance as Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Manager. I'm very happy to be here with you today to present lessons from Millennium Water Alliance wash operation in Ethiopia. I will take you through Okay, I will take you through this outline, briefly, background, as context, objectives of Sustainable Wash Project, and the approach, inline chlorination system installation, results, and recommendation. Just to highlight some background information, most of the rural communities in Ethiopia face problem of poor water quality and inadequate service. Water quality, both at source and at point of use, has been a critical issue due to microbial contamination. This has happened due to a range of factors, including absence of regular chlorination, periodic disinfection, and improper dosage, manual dispensation of disinfectants, quite high cost, and absence of sustainable chlorine supply. Recontamination of water during transport and storage, lack of water quality test kits and reagents, and limited capacity for water quality testing and monitoring, poor service delivery in remote and hard-to-reach locations, and absence of accountability mechanism when it comes to limitations in terms of maintaining water quality, and limited technology options to provide affordable water quality products and services are the restraining factors for the presence of this pressing challenge in the water sector there in Ethiopia. MWA, in collaboration with partners, implemented a 5-year collaborative sustainable wash project in Amhara region of Ethiopia to attain 5 objectives. Here are the objectives of the project. The first one is strengthening aspect of the service delivery model, including our system, including planning, partnership development, resource mobilization, and institutional capacity building, increase access to safe water, improve sanitation and hygiene service at school, increase access to safe and sustainable water, sanitation and hygiene services in healthcare facilities, increase the proportion of people served with basic access by 8% and reduce non-functionality by 6%, using a range of technology options, and increase safe water access to over 200,000 people, employing technology options. So the inline chlorination intervention is in connection to attaining objective 5. The approach. So MWA has used participatory approach for planning, implementation and monitoring of activities with strong engagement of local government and community structures. So after interactive discussions, stakeholders consultations, and community sensitization activities, MWA and partners could be able to install 6 inline chlorination systems at multi-village water supply systems, serving about 32,900 people. In line with the inline chlorination installation, there were lots of activities with regard to water supply system upgrading, including solarization of the water supply systems, construction of water points, reservoirs, and establishing household connections, and improving service delivery, establishing rural water utilities, and providing the necessary support to enable them improve the service delivery. With that, there is a remote monitoring dashboard built into the system to check the adequacy and consistency of liquid chlorine dosage into the water supply system. And there has been local capacity building and community empowerment as integral components of intervention. We used exploratory research approach to capture the results and lessons from the inline chlorination system installation there. The inline chlorination system, looking at the severity of water quality issues at source and at point of use, MWA took the initiative to implement 2 technology options. The first one is inline chlorination at piped water supply systems and dispensers for safe water to address the issue at point source. So inline chlorination system is a simple and cost-effective technology installed to treat water without user input. So in this inline chlorination system, there are 3 basic components or devices. The first one is the water device, which helps to produce liquid chlorine through electrolysis using local available resources, including water, sodium chloride, and energy or electricity. The other device is the Clara Plus, which injects a predetermined amount of chlorine to the water supply system based on the flow rate. And the third component is the remote monitoring dashboard, which enables to check the adequacy and consistency of liquid chlorine dosage into the system, and it enables to capture real-time data when it comes to water quality and quantity. You may refer the specifications, the Clara specifications, using the QR code over there. So that photo is from the site we implemented inline chlorination system. Results. The inline chlorination initiative has shown promising results at community level due to its simplicity in operation, chlorination consistency, and affordability. A close look at the water quality test result. The initial test result shows that it was like 0.5% milligram per liter of the free residual chlorine layer. When it comes to the test results after installation, it has become within the lower limit, with the range of 0.2 to 0.3% per milligram per liter. So the inline chlorination is socially accepted. It is in line with the local context, and there has been active engagement and acceptance among the local government entities and the community structures there. So the inline chlorination system was found to be effective and sustainable at community level. The lessons that we captured from practice. The first one is, since water quality is a critical issue there, it is good to implement inline chlorination system at scale to ensure water quality at source and at point of use. The second one is, it is essential to provide adequate incentives for those technicians who are actively engaged in the operating and maintenance of inline chlorination system and even the water supply system. The other one is water utilities and other service providers should revisit the water tariff considering the operating cost of inline chlorination, and the water quality agenda requires the collaborative part of actors and collaborators to enable the government own or take the ownership and to lead endeavors when it comes to addressing water quality issues. The other one is it is necessary to give emphasis for local capacity building and community ownership to sustain the technology and improve adoption. It is equally important to strengthen sectoral integration and collaboration among actors and stakeholders to give adequate attention to addressing water quality issues. Acknowledgement. We are too much grateful for the donor Conrad Hilton Foundation, government partners at region, zone, and district level, and community level stakeholders, program partners including the Clara, CARE, Catholic Relief Service, WaterAid, and World Vision, and I'm much grateful for the reviewers and advisory team members. You may use my contact address for further information, and you can access the program fact sheet using the QR code there. Thank you so much for your attention. And
thank you, Mussie. We'll take some questions.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. That was really fascinating. The water treatment system, the chlorination system with the three components, what kind of capital cost is involved with that, and what level of recharging with salt and maintenance does it require?
Thank you so much for the question. And the main investment, the main cost is the investment cost in terms of supplying the hardware, the infrastructure, and of course the assembly was made locally in Ethiopia, working with Clara. So the main cost is the capital expenditure. When it comes to operation and maintenance, it is not an issue still, since we have been conducting close follow-up. So those 6 inline chlorination systems are properly functioning, and except some minor disruptions that require technical support, there is no damage happened yet, and we believe that it is sustainable and cost effective.
Great, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. Could you just touch on really quickly which incentives you all use for the water technicians involved in the operation and maintenance?
Thank you for the question. Most of the time, community water supply systems are managed by WASH course and water user associations, but that has inherent limitation. Looking at the challenge, we try to professionalize the service delivery there, establishing and providing training, the necessary training as per the procedures and protocols. So this community managed water supply systems are transitioned to rural water utilities. So there are technicians hired by rural utilities. So it is necessary to provide adequate incentives, both in cash and in kind if possible, by the respective rural utilities to enable those water technicians provide the operation and maintenance, frequent operation and maintenance, if any damage happens over time.
Any questions at the back?
I'm curious when thinking about broader picture sustainability and O&M, like what is the availability of the technology within Ethiopia? Like what are the supply chains like for the importation? Like, is it readily importable? Is it, one of our challenges with inline coordination was that. Like can we get the parts from outside of Ethiopia in?
Thank you for the question. The supplier, the Clara private enterprise, has made the assembly locally, but there are imported items. So if there is high demand, and if the scale up will happen, we believe that the spare parts and other items availability will not be an issue. But when it comes to our case, it is we are still piloting stage, where we installed 6 inline chlorination systems. But there are also inline chlorination systems by other actors in other parts of the country. So looking at the future areas of intervention, as water quality is still an issue, and if there will be high level of buying among the government entities and other civil society actors, the spare part availability and operation and maintenance will be managed like other parts of the water supply system in general.
Well, thank you, Mussie. Let's appreciate you. Now, I'll welcome our second presenter, Rod Beadle from CARE.
I advance with this. Can I use the... Hi everyone, I'm Rod Beadle, the Water Plus Director at CARE, and I am the third string quarterback on this. Our original technical work was done by Dr. Adunya Tedese, who is with our CARE Ethiopia office. This was going to be presented by Kelly Alexander, who's our Deputy Director, and she wasn't able to make it, so you're stuck with me today. I'm going to be talking about a groundwater vulnerability assessment that we performed for the Tana Basin in Ethiopia. And we are part of a larger project called Promoting IWRM, or Integrated Water Resource Management and Environmental Sustainability to Enhance Water Availability and Livelihoods in Ethiopia's Tana Sub-Basin. Not your typical acronym, is it? So, this is funded by Conrad Hilton Foundation. The project leads were World Resource Institute and Millennium Water Alliance, and we served as the groundwater analysis sub-consultant for this. The study area, is this the... Where's the laser, is it? Ah, it's right there, okay, yeah. So, Ethiopia, Amara region in the northwest, and we are studying the Tana sub-basin with its primary feature being Lake Tana, which I believe is the source of the Blue Nile, right?
Yeah.
It's a basin of about 15,000 square kilometers, 1,100 to 1,900 millimeters of rain per year, and is an elevated plateau area in Ethiopia. Groundwater is a super important resource in the sub-basin. It's vital for agriculture, which is intensive and growing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But it also supplies domestic water and serves industry and supports ecosystems within the basin, and is an important source of recharge for Lake Tana. A lot of emerging threats. Part of the reason for the study was to study the effect of these threats. Agricultural use within the sub-basin has expanded significantly, but even more importantly, the use or overuse of fertilizer and pesticides has become an issue within the basin. We have poor sanitation practices and a lot of potential for contamination of groundwater through primarily shallow wells, but also boreholes and springs. Increased industrial effluent, mostly associated with industries probably around the city of Bahir Dar, which is in the southeast corner of Lake Tana. I think it's the 4th or 5th largest city in Ethiopia. And then a lot of climate change impacts, which I'll talk a little bit more about in another slide. And deforestation, land degradation has reduced natural filtration as well. Water quality challenges within the basin for both groundwater and surface water. The southern Gulf of Lake Tana, especially as we get close to Bahir Dar, is where we find the highest levels of contamination. We've found elevated levels of nitrates and phosphates associated with fertilizers, microbial contamination, especially in shallow wells and springs, and even heavy metals issues in many of our samples. As I mentioned, climate change has had a big effect on the basin, on groundwater. It has significantly altered the recharge and pollutant transport within the basin. Deforestation has led to erosion and increased sediment transport. That and loss of vegetative cover has reduced soil infiltration, so we get a lot more runoff and flooding than we used to. And land degradation has also contributed to issues, and all associated with climate change effects in the basin. So why did we do the assessment? Well, because of all the reasons I just listed, but we wanted to identify the areas of highest risk, to use a geographical based system to do that analysis, evidence-based to site wells rather than just siting them wherever next to sanitary discharge, and then also to inform local policy. And we use the DRASTIC model, and this acronym stands for the 7 primary hydrogeologic parameters that go into the model. But the model was developed by US EPA, I think 1987, and it looks at 7 primary parameters in the standard model, which include the depth of water, the recharge rate, aquifer media, soil media, topography, the impact of the vadose zone, which is the zone between the surface and the water table, and hydraulic conductivity. And then the modified model, which is what we used, also considers the effects of land use and land cover on vulnerability of groundwater. And all of this was done using ArcGIS tools in order to enable that spatial analysis on a raster basis. Basically, each of these 8 parameters then are analyzed, input graphically into ArcGIS, and overlaid between, or layers created, and then a weighted drastic number, drastic index, DI, is generated from adding all of these factors together. And once that DI is determined, and in our case the modified DI, because we're also considering land use, we analyze the pixels within the basin, and I apologize, I'm not quite sure what resolution we used, but it was pretty small resolution. If our DI is, if our DI is lower than 100, we consider the vulnerability of groundwater to contamination to be very low, and then up to a higher number above 160 indicates very high. We also did a sensitivity analysis, which looks at the impacts of removing and putting back in each of the individual parameters, and a validation based on sample collection throughout the basin to to look at do these results correlate with the results that we physically find from those samples. So real quick, I'll go through each of the inputs and what we found. And so on the right, on the right are the individual maps associated with each of them, and then we'll look at a composite map in a little bit. For each parameter, as we move down the table, the vulnerability gets higher. So for depth to water table, if it's greater than 30 meters, it's a lower vulnerability because it takes longer for the surface water to get there. And then when you're in 4.5 to 9 meter range, that's the highest vulnerability. So we can see that we have medium to high, 34, 44, yeah, much, maybe 65% is high vulnerability, so relatively shallow groundwater. Net recharge is another thing we look at. This is the depth to water map. This is net recharge, and again, where we have a very, and that's how much of the surface water that falls in rainfall within the basin gets into the groundwater, and that is very high for 22% of the basin, but pretty moderate for most of it. Next parameter is the aquifer media. What kind of media is the water table sitting within? Is it very impermeable? Does water move and pollutants move quickly? And so within the aquifer, marshy, swampy areas where water will be held and doesn't move very quickly is relatively low. But then we have a lot of basalts within the basin, and basalts tend to fracture and allow movement of water and pollutants. But you see that we have down in this area, the south, more basalts than we do in some of the other areas, and as we get around the lake itself, as we'd expect, we find more of those marshy soils that it's in. Soil media, which is the upper level of the soil, there we look at clay, which would have a very low impermeability, so pollutants aren't getting into the groundwater as fast, all the way down to peat and gravel, and this map represents that. And you can see that we have a relatively high amount of gravel soil media, which is the highest susceptibility to contamination. Next input is slope. The steeper the slope is, the faster the water runs off. It becomes surface runoff and becomes less likely to get into the groundwater. So a steep slope is less susceptibility, and a flat slope is more. And you can see the flat slope are the greens, and these are mostly agricultural low areas. We have a lot of susceptibility from relatively flat slope with steeper slopes around the edges of the basin. And then this Picasso, I don't know why it turned out quite like that, but that represents the Vados zone, and that's the zone in between, it's a critical zone in between the surface and the groundwater or the water table. And similar to before, we look at, to the aquifer, we look at what materials are in there, and we tend to have a lot of basalts, cobbles and pebbles, things that transmit water pretty quickly. So again, relatively high level of potential as evidenced by 21, 27, and 22%. Then finally, for the standard model, we look at hydraulic conductivity, which is the overall rate that water flows through the soil, and meters per day. And that, for most of the basin, is relatively low. From about 77% is in the low susceptibility versus the higher conductivity areas, and that's represented by this map. And then finally, for the modified method, where we start to consider land use, forest cover, shrub, bare land, grassland, those are relatively low. pollutant potential versus agricultural land tends to have a higher potential, again, because of the use of fertilizer and such. Built up areas or urbanized areas like Bahir Dar, and then water bodies themselves, that's a direct connection to the groundwater, so that's high susceptibility. So, that's this map. So, I have 2 maps left. This is our results based upon just the standard DRASTIC model, not considering land use and land cover. And you can see overall, we look pretty good. And high to very high susceptibility is only about 22% of the total basin. But when we do the modified model and we include, when we include land cover, the results flip on their head. And that's because there's so much agricultural expansion and development, relatively high population within the region, and suddenly our high to very high goes from 22% to about 68% of the basin. So I think I'm pretty close to time, so I'm going to jump over our conclusions and recommendations is to just keep doing this and track changes over time, and integrate this into planning as we do with all of our projects, hopefully. So.
Thank you. I guess we have time for a question or two.
Thanks for that. I love this analysis of the risks that you're highlighting. And I'm just wondering, perhaps I missed it, if you did a map analysis of the settlement areas, where are the people living, as that overlays with the contamination or potential?
We did, and I didn't have time to get into a lot of the data gathering, but we did a spatial analysis. We were not able to do, most of this was desktop review, gathering information from existing sources, but which is easy to do spatially for population areas. But that's part of that 7th parameter, is it includes mapping of population zones. So. This is the scariest part for me because I did not do this analysis. And I see John, who has a doctorate in groundwater. Don't give that man the microphone.
Brian Schweitzer with COBA. Thanks for the presentation. I've seen similar presentations on groundwater vulnerability using the DRASTIC model and others that have been applied to areas where cholera outbreaks are occurring. There's a high risk of cholera, for example, Mussie, things like that. So just curious as to, and maybe it's difficult for you to touch on this, but the kind of level of effort to do this analysis and the extent to which it's being promoted as a risk-based assessment. Because they were looking specifically on the vulnerability risks and looking at the high productivity boreholes. So thinking about many that are unchlorinated in this context of soccer.
Yeah, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So you can pull, and it kind of depends on the resolution of the data that you're pulling in. But I do know that Dr. Adunya, he went to a pretty microscopic level to with the data that he gathered. But each of those parameters, there is some susceptibility to error just based on the fact that you don't always have the greatest. And we were definitely limited in our ability to gather field data just by the insecurity in the area. So.
Thank you. So we will now transition to our third presenter, Monica Castro.
This is better this way. Okay, I'm Monica. I will talk to you today about aluminum electrocoagulation and some indicators we can use for decentralized drinking water treatment. So electrocoagulation is a treatment solution for decentralized water treatment. It's an alternative to chemical coagulation, which is the traditional method where you add the chemical powder like alum. Electrocoagulation addresses barriers to the access and transportation of these chemicals because you can generate this coagulant on site, and this is done here by applying a current through metal plates. This is more accessible materials such as aluminum or iron. And for example, this is an example of a plant that has been installed in India. There has been around 200 treatment plants installed. So go a bit more in detail real quickly how these coagulants are formed. We apply a current through these two aluminum plates, and this will result in this series of reactions that produce this aluminum solid. And this solid has the structure that can absorb the pollutants, and then this will be removed through settling and then filtration. However, even though this can have many advantages to the application in decentralized treatment, we still have some barriers and challenges to its implementation. The first is difficult to estimate the coagulant dose, because when you have the powder or the chemical salt, you can measure that and then you know what you're adding. But in this case, since you're applying the current, usually you can associate that with the aluminum and then get your concentration, but you would have to go to a lab and measure that. So that's not always possible in a rural setting. And also, over time, you will have these deposits that form on the plates. And I mean, from the solution that accumulate on the plates, I have an example here of how over time, with the accumulation of these, the current will not pass and dissolve the aluminum, so deliver this coagulant in the solution. So we don't know also, as this efficiency comes down, how often do we replace the electrodes. So we have these gaps. We don't have a lack of a non-chemical method. And in the same page, we have a lack of indicators that we can use to guide replacement. And also we don't have a lot of studies about the long-term electrode wear and degradation. So the objectives here were, can we use current density as an indicator that can relate to the coagulant dose? And also we want to evaluate observations of the plate health and if we can quantify that and develop a method that can also be used in the field later. So our experimental approach, these were a series of experiments that lasted 3 weeks each, and we ran them for 6 hours every day in 2-hour batches. So in these batches represented like the length of time that these systems would be ran at. They would typically last for maybe 15 minutes to 2 hours that they would be ran. So that's why we replace the solution every 2 hours just to simulate the degradation at a faster pace. We also, every 22 hours, took one of the reactors offline so we could evaluate how the plate was looking for degradation. This was our setup. So we have the 3 reactors set up. And for the aluminum samples, we collected from the water every 10 hours. And we measured that with flame absorption spectroscopy, and we collected other parameters as well. And for the current, we were able to measure that the whole time because that's automatic with just a data logger. Okay, so going into our results, first I want to show you just the current. We tested 2 voltages, which is 8 and 12, and this is because it's kind of the range I have seen that they use in the field. And for our solution, it was sodium bicarbonate and calcium chloride, and this was just to provide some sort of buffer so we could see the change in the current over time. And the current shows here a trend for the highest points were just a new solution, and over the 2-hour batch it goes all the way down. So we're using constant voltage, so that's why we can see these changes in the current. And as you see over time, it went down a little bit, but how does this correlate with the aluminum or the coagulant? So as you can see here, it's pretty steady pattern. We didn't really see a lot of decrease, which is good because this means the system is working for several treatment batches using this setup. So we have the aluminum ranging from 15 to 240. And what does this mean? So 28 milligrams per liter is what we have seen from previously, the amount of aluminum that we would need to reduce fluoride. So we are above this threshold all throughout the treatment. And here I just circled all different corresponding current to that point in time of the aluminum measurement. So even though here we, up to the last point, we saw the current was lower or the lowest, the aluminum is still very high. So that was good. So then for the 12 volts, we see a very similar trend also for the aluminum. So I want to go over again because very similar results. And also for this one, our aluminum from 19 to 340. So it is higher because higher is the current that you use, the more, of course, the place will dissolve. Okay, so now how do we quantify the plate health? So this is the same plate. It's just the different sides of each plate. Of the same plate. So the outer side, it was the side that was facing the reactor, and the inner side, we call it the one that was facing the other plate. So first, I'll show you these are pictures from the outer face. So we can see the pits increasing over time. So this can be something that if you are observing in the field, also you can see over time how will this will correspond to a certain point that your idea was. Like let's say at this point maybe there's not enough aluminum, but that's not the case for this in our results. But that's the general idea. Also for the mass loss, we can see the same trend. If we saw a decrease in aluminum concentration, this would also be reflected in the mass loss, but it's still increasing. So this indicates or supports our results that we have sustained aluminum as well. So this is the interface, is where we saw the most degradation. Instead of seeing those clusters of pits I showed you earlier, the degradation was more uniform throughout. So you can see this is the uncorroded plate, and over time you see more and more wear. And this is more of preliminary results where we're trying to take these plates and try to quantify where we can see that it's more worn out, but we're trying to put a number to how worn out is it. So in this 3D scanner that we used, we can set a reference area, and it's like 2 points that you put in the machine, and then the rest are below it. So all the points below is what gives you this fitting volume. So this is still preliminary because we have to adjust it manually, so it can be overestimating the volume, but it still shows us the general trend where the darker blue is, it's more worn out, and the green is less worn out. So that's a general trend we see. Okay. So in this last experiments that we did, we wanted to encourage the passive film accumulation. So instead of replacing the batch every 2 hours, which would be more representative of the field conditions, we replaced it every 24 hours. So what this did was it encouraged the accumulation of these deposits. So in the other place I showed you, there wasn't a lot of this white film. And in this one's, because we didn't replace it, this film accumulated a lot on the plates. And I have a picture of before and after cleaning. So our theory is, and also moving forward, wherever you see this spots where all the passive film is accumulated, there's not going to be as many pits. So we still have to develop this method. And from these plates, we did see a decrease in the current, and there was a corresponding decrease in the aluminum concentration. As you see, after 50 hours, we also saw a decrease in current and a decrease in the aluminum. So if we did our experiments over more hours than the 80 hours that we did, we would expect at some point we would see a decrease in the current that would correlate, like in this example, with the aluminum concentration. So yeah, in the future, just what I described, we're going to try to fine-tune our pitting analysis method. And yeah, that's all. Thank you.
right on time. Are there any questions from my end?
Thank you very much. I was wondering to know if you have tracked the aluminum concentration in the water at different voltages, like you have tested at 2 different voltages, right? So if you have analyzed the aluminum solution.
Sorry, at 2 different, I didn't catch 2 different.
So your testing, experimental testing was at 2 different voltages, right?
Yes.
8 and 12.
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
So what about the aluminum concentration in the solution, like in the water?
Yes.
You have tested.
Yeah, what I tested for was the total aluminum. But we don't have, if we had, for example, fluoride, I think we would see less aluminum because it would be all combined. But we don't have a contaminant in the solution. So we're just trying to see how much we can generate right now.
Sorry, Monica, if I may. I think the question was, how did aluminum concentration vary with voltage? When you did 12 versus 8, how much more aluminum did you produce?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So, is that your question? Okay, I'm sorry, I did not get that. So, for how we varied, so of course we apply more, or in theory we apply more voltage, we will see greater aluminum, but there's also the, yes, I don't know the word, but, cavi, I don't know. That at some point, even though you will have more initially, aluminum at some point, because you're applying more voltage, it's gonna decrease a lot faster. You know, so you're gonna use it up a lot faster. So it's gonna we're gonna have more sustained at 8 overall.
Anybody else? Going once? Well, thank you. And now, on to our last, but certainly not least, presenter, Dr. Mike Fisher.
Thanks so much, Sarah. All right. Can everybody hear okay?
Yeah.
So I want to present some work done by a bunch of really wonderful people in collaboration with World Vision, UNC, but also with collaboration of Ghana, several Ghana Inline ministries, including CWSA and other ministries, as well as local academic partners, including Zach Seydu at UDS, Prof. Nyarko at KNUST, Solomon Manila at World Vision, and several others on primary prevention of lead in drinking water through substitution of lead-free plumbing components. And these results are preliminary, but I think they tell the story. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So quick show of hands, who's bought in on the assertion that lead is harmful to human health, especially for little babies? All right, great. So I'm going to move quickly through this, but what we know from WHO's 2022 technical guidance is that lead in drinking water is eminently preventable. It primarily comes from corrosion of leaded parts and materials in water systems, and if we can eliminate the use of those, we should be able to do effective primary prevention and dramatically reduce lead in drinking water. And we've got good evidence from the last 15 years or so from high-income countries in North America, US and Canada, that when we look at child blood lead levels, contribution of water lead isn't the whole story, may not even be the biggest factor, but too much of the story to ignore, you know. And so we see substantive contribution of lead in drinking water to elevated child blood lead in high-income countries in North America. And so it's kind of the takeaway from that is, again, your mileage is going to vary country by country and decade by decade, but overall, lead in drinking water, too big a deal to ignore. If we want to get to a lead-free future for children, we're going to need to do something about lead in drinking water. So we're bought in that lead is harmful, that it's important, especially for babies, that it is preventable in drinking water. So the question is, what is the prevalence of lead occurrence in drinking water in low and middle income countries, and what we're going to be talking about today, how effective is primary prevention? So WHO says primary prevention is the way to go, and that makes sense. Well, how much of the problem can we solve when we do primary prevention, eliminating leaded parts in the supply chain, and also how much is it going to cost? And so what do effectiveness and cost effectiveness look like in at least one study where a very brave partner went and tried this to see what they could find out in collaboration with a bunch of other folks. And when I say very brave partner, I mean that when we went around and said, hey, we think there might be lead in drinking water globally, who wants to help us find bad news and then do something about it? The response was actually not overwhelming, but World Vision signed up for the challenge. And so back in 2016, we got data from over 250 rural water systems in Ghana, Mali, Niger, and West Africa, and we found across the board occurrence of lead in water system components, occurrence of lead in drinking water at levels of concern, about 6% exceeding WHO guideline value in Ghana, and we found correlation between where there was high lead in parts we tested and the lead in drinking water in those same systems. So leading us to believe that, again, if we can prevent the use of leaded parts in new systems, that should hopefully address most of the issue that we're seeing. Come to find out that when we look at lead in parts in northern Ghana, particularly among systems installed more recently, we found a lot of lead in brass taps, and we also found galvanized steel tanks, taps, spouts, etc. also had elevated lead by handheld XRF. And when we took examples of those same parts back to the lab and did standard NSF61 leaching studies, we found that the brass and galvanized parts with lead leached enough lead in drinking water to explain those high levels that we were observing in the field. So we had a couple lines of evidence. Lab study looks like it's coming from the parts. Field study looks like it's coming from the parts. So can we replace the parts that we've identified as most likely to be problematic and see what happens? And also, World Vision immediately sent out a brass taps memo saying, hey, globally, let's stop using brass taps and substitute lead-free alternative like stainless steel. In addition, Sid Roy just came out with a publication just running the numbers on how much it costs to go to lead-free alternatives to brass and stainless, and found it was less than 2% of the total installation cost for a new rural water system with lead-free parts in their case. And obviously, your mileage may vary for different technologies and settings, but that was what they found. You know, this also sort of lines up with what we got from a global systematic review, where we looked at about 1,000 studies reporting on lead in drinking water, and we found that really no source type was immune from having high levels of lead reported in drinking water. Call it 25 to 30% of non-targeted samples estimate exceeded WHO guideline values, and no SDG region was immune. And you know, that central measure of central tendency, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Is it 20, 25, 30? You know, again, you're going to get varying study quality, etc. But again, it was too much drinking water to ignore has high lead globally, not just one region, and across source types, not just one source type. And so we had multiple lines of evidence saying, hey, it'd be a really good idea to try and do primary prevention and see what happens. And we said, hey, who wants to volunteer to do that? Again, not an overwhelming response. But World Vision raised their hand and said, yeah, let's go do that in northern Ghana, actually same place where you did the 2016 study that gave us all the bad news, see if we can get some good news there. And post publishing that 2016 study, they went and drafted new guidelines that said all new systems have to be implemented with lead-free parts, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to require the manufacturer to certify that the part is lead-free. And so we started with 150 existing systems and 69 newer systems for which the manufacturer had certified, pinky promise, all lead-free parts. Well, trust and verify, come to find out that when we did XRF validation, some of the galvanized steel and brass in the new parts that the manufacturer had pinky promised turned out to contain lead as well. And so, we worked with the partner until they had implemented 106 new systems where the parts were verified by X-ray fluorescence to meet international standards for lead in drinking water, so less than 0.25% lead by weight. And so now we had about 100 verified new lead-free systems, 150 existing, probably have lead in them systems, and those 69 pinky promise systems. And we analyzed lead in each of these systems in key selected parts, those, brass and galvanized parts that we thought could be a problem. We did that once by handheld XRF. Well, I didn't do that actually. Solomon, Zach, and the field teams from World Vision, UDS, and their collaborators, they did a wonderful job of that once. And then first flush water samples from each system by ICP-MS for each round. All right, and running short on time. QA/QC miraculously showed that the blanks were blank and the duplicates duplicated, and most of the spikes came out looking okay. And so we inferred that we trusted the data we were getting from the lab, which told us that across the board, about 5% of water samples across all systems exceeded WHO guideline values. And when we broke it down by old versus new systems at the intention to treat level, we found significantly less likely to exceed that WHO guideline value for the new systems with lead-free parts. Specifically, the old systems, 6.1% of them exceeded 10 parts per billion. The new systems at the intention to treat level, we think they're supposed to be lead-free, only 0.9% of those exceeded. And of the new verified lead-free, so they're supposed to be in the lead-free arm, and we checked by XRF and they really were, and none of those exceeded 10 parts per billion. And when we look at this sort of intermediate risk category of 1 to 10, again, we find that 35% of the old systems and more like 10% of the new systems are in that intermediate, it doesn't exceed the guideline, but I wouldn't want my kids drinking it category. And so the big takeaway is use of lead-free parts reduced concentrations of lead in drinking water significantly and by a lot. The cost of switching for this implementer was less than 2% of the total installation cost. Suggests that doing primary prevention, like WHO says we should, can effectively reduce lead exposure from drinking water in this setting, and other settings, maybe if these results generalize, to be determined, and doesn't cost that much. And also, just other notes, the robust QA/QC was really needed to get fit-for-purpose lab data, and handheld XRF worked really well for figuring out which parts were really, truly lead-free, despite what manufacturers pinky promised. So many, many thanks to lots and lots of people. But again, I really want to shout out World Vision for saying, hey, give us the bad news, even if we don't 100% know how to fix it, we're here for it, because that is pretty rare. Global lead-free pledge to eliminate leaded parts in new water systems by 2030. QR code here. Strongly recommend folks get involved, whether you're government, utility, researcher, or, just generally interested. Check it out. Thank you. And questions?
Thank you, Mike. This is really a great information you're sharing with all of us. I think there are over thousands of wells in Ghana with galvanized pipes in there. We've all been corporates as a sector, people who have worked in the past. I'm wondering if you have shared this report or this research results with the government. It doesn't matter the cost. Even if the cost is even 100%, the cost or the harm to a human being is more than the cost of just replacing. And it doesn't matter how much it is. So my first question is, this results is shared in UNC. Is it shared in Ghana for people to take action? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, World Vision is very honest to say, give us the bad news. How about the other people who have not owned it? What is the government doing about that? And then who is responsible for sanctioning the importation of these pipes into the country? Who is handling people in a way? Thank you.
If I use the podium
Yeah,
mic,
would you like
like that? Yeah. So, John, I think you're trying to get me in trouble. But what I would say is, if I shared these results at UNC before sharing them with the government, you should not trust anything I ever say ever again, to be perfectly honest. So we had this interesting situation where the results were less preliminary than we thought. So we shared them with government in a briefing note, and we said, are you cool if we share these at UNC, and then we brief you in person as soon as somebody younger and smarter than me, like Timothy Purvis, can actually get to Ghana to come and share these properly in person. And they said, absolutely. And they also said, please, share the raw data as soon as possible, because we're updating standards and regulations, and we want to have the opportunity to take those on board. So to your question about, importation, certainly having standards and regulations on paper doesn't immediately eliminate parts from the supply chain, but government has to lead. Until you have those standards and regulations on paper, it's very difficult to do anything. And then there was a question in the middle that was very good about thousands of systems, maybe tens of thousands in Ghana. And I want to be careful not to overinterpret our results. So what we say from this is, WHO already in 2022 put out excellent technical guidance that says primary prevention first, and these results appear to indicate that yes, primary prevention not only is the first thing, but also in this setting it's the biggest thing. So what about existing systems where it's too late for primary prevention? I don't think it's appropriate to make a recommendation, but we can state some facts, which is that no matter what we might wish for, existing systems don't last forever. And no matter how much we might wish to do it, even if we found it was very effective to replace all the leaded parts, it wouldn't be done tomorrow. And so I think it's appropriate, and this really aligns with WHO 2022 guidance, to have a conversation about, first, let's not put lead in any new water systems if we can possibly avoid it. And then let's think about how do we progressively do the most appropriate risk-based thing with respect to existing systems, whether that is figuring out optimized corrosion control treatment for pipe systems, certainly large pipe systems, and can it be adapted to smaller and rural systems? We'd like to try and find out. And then for existing hand pumps, again, I think the question is, maybe they're not all equally risky with respect to, is it a bunch of brass parts that are leaching very high levels of lead? Is it a single small galvanized part that's near the end of its design life? Is it in a large community or a small community? And so I could imagine a very nuanced risk-based conversation to say, hey, look, we have infinite priorities and finite resources. What does an optimal, risk-based but proactive, progressive remediation strategy look like? And I don't have a better answer than that now, but we are certainly proposing, hey, can we do head-to-head comparisons of low-cost, evidence-based remediation methods in field settings to say something about effectiveness and cost-effectiveness in different settings. Is that fair? All right, sorry, long answer, but I know we have other questions.
Thank you. Really appreciate the presentation. I was wondering if you could speak about the work that was done to go from pinky promises to verified lead-free, and maybe the costs were not substantially higher, but the cost of that additional verification may have been substantial. So how did you work with suppliers and the implementer to go from pinky promises to verified lead-free, and is that replicable? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we have a side event tomorrow on, thinking about what would a draft roadmap of this look like, because AmCal and others have called for that for the region, and one of those elements is exactly what you're talking about, which is, okay, what does trust but verify look like? So, you start with reasonable international standards, and so that was kind of what the testing was based around, which is, and the specifications, which is NSF 372, less than 0.25% lead, probably a good place to start. These results suggest that made a difference. Promises are nice. third-party verification was really the standard that our partner used when they went from Pinky Promise to, see it to believe it. And so, and they actually went one step further, which was third-party verification and also, at least in the case of Ghana, in-country testing by handheld XRF, which the XRF is capital intensive, but then the marginal cost for one more scan is very small. So if somebody somewhere who you trust has one, that's very helpful. And one of the things that goes into the roadmap conversation is, what does guidance look like? To say, hey, wherever you are on the trajectory, here's some tried and true things that work, and here's some different approaches that you can do, whether you want a composition standard, like less than 0.25%, or a performance standard, whether you want third-party pre-shipment verification, or you want to do it yourself in country. So hopefully it looks like a series of conversations, not a one-size-fits-all, so that, different countries can say, hey, this is an approach that aligns with our priorities now, and ... what makes sense going forward. Does that answer your question?
Any more questions?
So I'm not a materials engineer, but my understanding is that galvanization doesn't necessarily include lead as a component, and that even manufacture of brass, lead is typically added for machinability, malleability. Is the issue, I don't quite understand what the issue is with galvanization, or where lead gets into that. And then with brass, is the issue around regulation on its inclusion in those components, when and where they're made?
Great, three-part answer. First part, I don't know. Second part, with respect, here's what I have heard, when Timothy, my co-author, and others looked into this. With brass, like you said, it's added for machinability. Other alloys can be used to achieve the same effect, right? Bismuth and others. One of the challenges is, if you're asking your field team to look, well, lead-free and leaded brass, to the untrained eye, they look kind of similar, so there's issues there. With respect to galvanization, what Timothy found in his reading was that in some cases, adding 1% lead intentionally can reduce the thickness of the zinc coating, and so that can be a cost-cutting measure that some manufacturers can use intentionally. It may also be that, if the source of your zinc is, sort of recycling or repurposing of, industrial sources, you might get lead in there unintentionally, and so don't know, but it sounds like there are both intentional and unintentional ways that it happens for both. And with respect to lead-free brass, there are folks who are specifying that and using it. What we liked about stainless in conversations with World Vision was that any field level team member can visually differentiate the two. And so it was nice that the material both met composition and performance standards with respect to lead-free, and you could tell if somebody had accidentally put in brass versus stainless. And so when they issued that, hey, no more brass tabs memo, it was with full knowledge that lead-free brass parts are available, but that you can visually differentiate whether the right one got put in or not. And that, in the short term, at least in this setting, was seen as advantageous. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does, thanks.
Thank you. Let's appreciate Mike again.
And let's appreciate our wonderful facilitator. Thank you so much.
So that's all we had lined up for today. Thank you for your time, for interacting with the presenters. I invite you all to head out to the poster sessions, grab yourself a drink, and happy Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
The only way we found this conference 10 years ago is that we didn't have lead wells in North Carolina.
I mean, I have a brother that Florida, check the entry going to your house.
Yeah. lead service lines.
We did a repiping.
Yes.
Yeah. And I have been doing a lot. It's not that much. And it wasn't community wells, it was pipe now.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah, no, well, absolutely. That and
I was gonna
you know, I don't know anyone else to do, but, you know, I checked the specification in terms of my plumbing products, and I wouldn't put brass products in anything.
I haven't hit open it. Yeah, we have meeting
I think in the United States, there are manufacturing standards that preclude, are supposedly.
For drinking water purposes. And if you read the fine print, you can see which fixtures on every aisle are for drinking water. But, you know, when I go into Lowe's and Home Depot, I'm like, oh man, if English wasn't my first language, and I didn't know which NSF standards meant what, like, there's a non-zero chance I'd grab the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah. I really enjoyed your talk too. I had questions as well, but I wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question. I was going to say, I think you know my collaborators at USF,
Yes.
Halsick and Muda, and so I was just really, you know, we've been trying to keep the Madagascar lead stuff going, and I was just like, I was here and I was just texting and I was like, do you know, because I wasn't here, like, you remember that guy? Like, do you know this guy?
Yeah, and we invited, you know, Jim and all those folks to come to our side event this year. They came to our side event last year and it was amazing. We invited them to come to our side event this year too, but again, like, you know, people have to prioritize, you can only go to so many conferences.
Yeah, and so I've been working on the project too there, and it's, it would be really interesting to see if there's any way to like combine efforts in this anti-lead in boreholes kind of effort, because Jim's retiring, and so Mahmuda and I are still trying to continue the work.
Oh, wonderful.
Madagascar is in a rebellion, so we know what's going
Well,
on.
you know, I mean, it seems like all the best places to work, like, you're gonna have the occasional.
Yeah, no, but we're, so we did a lot of work there, and then we've been trying to strategize where to go next and what to do next, and so,
Let's talk,
it'd be really
because
interesting to talk or something.
one of the things that might be interesting is, you know, and the last one was that sort of global lead-free water pledge.
Yeah.
And that's part of this, talks about a working group that Jim and some others from USF, I think, are part of. But we could talk about, as countries sign on to that, are they particularly interesting places to do this work, since they basically said, hey, where we find a problem, it aligns with our national strategy to figure out what's the most appropriate thing to do about it.
Yeah, and I thought the work that Mahmuda did on it with like the informal and like people requesting the lead parts, you know, like it's obviously a different kind of thing. Like they were lead weight, and people were like, I like the lead, you know, it's shiny.
Yeah, the technology is idiosyncratic, and the principle is probably first.
Yeah, so I don't know, so here's my slide, but you know, as a conservative, it'd be really great to connect, because I know we've been like trying to